Governor Brown urges a compassionate approach as the deportation of migrant children speeds up. Carl DeMaio shuns the Republican right in his attempt to unseat Democratic Congressman Scott Peters. And the state says veterans are illegally being targeted by a for-profit university in San Diego. I'm Mark Sauer, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome. It's Friday, August 1st, and I'm Mark Sauer. Joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Fronteras reporter Joe Replogle of KPBS News, Tony Perry, San Diego bureau chief for the Los Angeles Times, and reporter Liam Dillon from Voice of San Diego. Well, the weeks-old immigration crisis moved from the border to Washington, D.C. this week. President Obama wanted $3.7 billion to add more resources to deal with tens of thousands of kids and families arriving from Central America. The Senate offered about $2 billion, and House Republicans countered with $600 million or so, and then pulled even that amount off the table. Jill, there's many moving parts with this story here, and it seems like the administration is not going to get any money and any more resources. So let's start there.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it. The House is actually supposed to vote later today, on a revised bill, an even more conservative version of one that they failed to pass yesterday. And they want to get rid of a modified 2008 trafficking law, anti-trafficking law, and allow kids to be deported within 7 days. They're obviously not giving as much funding as the president wanted, and they also want to couple this with getting rid of the DACA program for immigrant kids who grew up here and went to high school here, and not allow the president to expand that. So they're looking at a more political version of what Obama hoped to just be a funding bill.
And of course, they would have to reconcile that with what the Senate has passed. $2 billion, as I noted in the open, is the money figure there, but there's all these political aspects.
Yeah, right. So the Senate wanted to pass a bill much more in line with what the administration wanted, which would be to provide more immigration judges, provide more detention space for families, and more resources to take care of the kids while they're here. Again, with the idea to speed up the legal process, but without taking away any of the rights and privileges that those children have now to get an immigration proceeding.
So if we don't get a deal, we don't get a reconciliation on this between the House and the Senate, Senate, of course, run by Democrats, the House run by Republicans, we're looking at a 5-week recess. Now we're off into the fall before anything, if anything, is done before the fall elections.
Yeah, and border authorities say they're gonna run out of money pretty soon. So it's unclear at this point what happens then.
Yeah, it's
really... In the meantime, immigration cases are getting even further backlogged. I mean, Obama has already said that they're trying to speed up these children's cases and put them sort of at the front of the docket. Well, that means that everyone else who's been waiting, 5, 6, 7 years sometimes to get through immigration court, they're either, an immigration judge told me the other day, the weak cases benefit from this. So if you're, likely to get eventually deported, you get to stay here longer. On the other hand, if you have a very good case for staying here, you're trying to get a green card or refugee status, well, you're stuck in legal limbo for even longer, while this case goes through. So,
and there were some ideas proposed this week, in spite of the fact they're not agreeing on anything, that maybe we can go into these countries and remind us again which countries we're talking about here in Central America.
Yeah, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. So there was an idea floated at the end of last week by the administration, and we know that they're discussing this, of starting to process the kids in the countries themselves. So we've done this before in Haiti, in Cuba, in Vietnam. And so starting and treating them as refugees. And so starting refugee processing there and, saying, hey, if you fear prosecution in your home country and you need to leave, you can come and we will give you an initial screening and then start the process there and transport you safely to the U.S. So, this would obviously avoid kids making the dangerous journey through Mexico, but the human rights community is split on whether or not this is a good idea, because in the past it's been used in conjunction with, very strict strategies to not let people just come to the border and apply for asylum. And then, I've talked to one sort of anti-immigration guy who also thinks it's a terrible idea because he thinks it'll just open the floodgates and allow a lot more people to apply and come into the U.S. and then have relatives here that can then send money back to Central America and bring more people. And right. So,
There's obviously no easy, simple solution, Tony.
And there's no difficult solution for that matter. How are we locally? Did the example of Murrieta and Escondido scare off the Border Patrol from bringing folks here? Or are they bringing folks here, not telling us about it, and doing sort of a stealth program?
I don't think so. I think really what happened is the numbers dropped, and it's still unclear why they dropped. It could be the train that brings a lot of these refugees from southern Mexico through a big chunk of Mexico has been derailed for a couple weeks, and so I talked to one of the Border Patrol union guys, and he thinks that's maybe a main reason the numbers have dropped. It's also really hot in South Texas. It's also possible that people have kind of gotten the message that this isn't such a great idea. But anyway, I think that's actually the bigger reason why they stopped transferring people. Because same thing in Nogales, they're not transferring kids to Nogales. And the numbers of the kids that are at the base in Ventura, way down. It's like half of what it was about a month ago.
Now, we spoke a moment ago about the 3 countries of origin that we're talking about here. But you had a story about, interesting story about Nicaragua, which is a very poor country. And yet we're not really relatively seeing almost no one coming from that country. Explain what you found.
Yeah. So, I mean, all those countries have very similar history. They were
close proximity to one another.
Close proximity, revolutionary upheaval in the 1970s and 1980s. Nicaragua is the poorest country by some measures in Central America.
So you think folks would be coming to escape poverty?
If that's the main reason people are coming, you would think that they would be coming too. They're not for a couple of reasons. One, crime is much lower in Nicaragua. They have a very effective community policing strategy. They've done a really good job of keeping kids out of gangs and getting them sort of back on the right path. Some would say that that's politically motivated and sort of aligned with a kind of Cuban-style, social control kind of program. But the fact is, the violence is just way lower. Another reason is because a lot of Nicaraguans go to Costa Rica. It's a lot closer. They have really strong family ties there. It's kind of the same situation as here. Jobs. Costa Rica has a much higher standard of living than Nicaragua. So
a lot of service jobs, a lot of
service jobs. Yeah. And then the other reason is because there are more Nicaraguans in this country who are here legally than from those other countries, and so they haven't had the same cycle of having parents be deported or kids deported and sort of, trying to get back. They also haven't brought the same kind of gang problems back to those countries that these other countries have. And so they just, they've had very different outcomes from the way that we've treated Nicaraguan immigrants here.
Now, I wanted to get to this clip from Governor Jerry Brown. Of course, he's a Democrat. And this week he urged a compassionate approach in dealing with migrants and especially children fleeing violence. Let's see what he had to say.
I want to give utmost consideration to what is in the best interest of those children, not what is in the best interest of politicians who like to exploit this particular topic.
Okay, so in the same week, we had Governor Rick Perry of Texas sending the National Guard down to the border. Somebody said, why don't you send the Dallas Cowboys as well? A different approach. Is that in a nutshell the difference here, Tony, between Democrats and Republicans on this issue?
Well, a bit, but of course the California National Guard has been on the border before too, not making arrests, but doing logistics and freeing up Border Patrol folks for actually making the arrests. So we're not totally St. Francis of Assisi here.
Yeah. But maybe not under Jerry Brown.
Well, if you look at the long term, and as we've said before in San Diego County, we've seen this, different iterations of it. This is a bit new, but we've seen the others. Generally speaking, the state government doesn't play any role at all. It just says, gee, that's a problem. The communities sometimes try to do something. They can't legally, and then the federal government is usually pretty ineffectual. So it seems to me we're playing this out once again, that we got 3 levels of government, for whatever reason, can't seem to get a handle on a common problem.
All right, and I'm sure we're going to be doing a lot more, and I know, Jill, you'll be doing a lot more reporting on this issue, and we've run out of time on that segment. So, well, women should retain the right to choose. Climate change is real, and same-sex couples deserve the right to marry. If you thought those were the positions of the Democrat running in San Diego's 52nd Congressional District, you'd be right. But they are also the position of the Republican candidate, Carl DeMaio. And Liam, is Carl DeMaio a Republican in name only, as that might suggest?
Well, he's been a Republican for more than half his life, working with some of the Republicans at the highest level of the Republican Party for more than half of his life. I think that speaks to the fact that, yes, indeed, he is in fact, a Republican. It's sort of interesting here, understanding what he means in the national context, understanding what his whole life has been about, which has been a pretty sincere member of the party and working on behalf of the party and working on behalf of the party at the highest levels. And also sort of what he would mean nationally from a national perspective. Certainly those positions put him out of step with what the national Republicans believe, but those positions put him in line, frankly, with what a lot of the Republicans here believe. The mayor of San Diego feels the same way. Basically every high-profile Republican in San Diego County pretty much feels the same way. And then you look at his history. Again, he worked for, while in college still, he worked for Newt Gingrich. He worked for Dick Armey, who was then the House Majority Leader.
Very conservative.
Absolutely. He worked for Virginia Thomas, who is the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And so long history of being involved in Republican causes for most of his life.
So he's got a tightrope to walk here. He's got a federal office he's going after. The federal party, the Republican Party, has a platform, and we've said how he's diverged from that platform. Sure. But he's got to get elected here. Tony?
Indeed, and he's running on the promise of going back there and changing the United States Congress from his seat
as
there.
one of 435 members.
Yeah.
Well, I thought it was so interesting. Apparently, this morning, or maybe it was yesterday, that he said he thought the Boehner's lawsuit against Obama was a waste of time, and that he wasn't going to do that. And I don't know. Yeah, I'm curious whether that will
what about his history?
resonate with people.
Is the incumbent Scott Peters, a Democrat fighting for a second term? He's going to try and portray Carl as a Tea Party and a Koch brothers acolyte. Right. Are those going to stick?
Well, he's certainly going to try to brand him that way. I think Carl, if Carl is anything, he's a master marketer of himself, a master marketer of his ideas. And I think anything that Peters throws at him, he'll be well positioned to handle. I think, though, at the same time, we're talking in a different context locally here. I mean, that position that DeMaio had against Boehner's lawsuit, I'm sure, is probably shared by the majority of the Republicans who are living in San Diego. I mean, same with same-sex marriage issues. And so, yes, he's out of step with positions are out of step with what the party is nationally, but I think he's certainly in line with what the party is like here.
What I find interesting is, we're electing a man, one of two of them, for the future. But yet it seems to me a lot of the campaign on both sides is going to be about what happened in the past when each was on the city council. Carl will say Scott nearly bankrupted the city with that crazy pension scheme.
Right.
And Peters will say that Carl was just so divisive. Who could work with the guy? So we're gonna be discussing things that happened a decade ago.
Sure.
Is that are we all going to go to sleep once they do that? Or?
Well, pastor's prologue, right? So obviously, I think that there's some relevance and a lot of relevance to talking about how people were before and how they will behave going forward. Certainly. But yeah, I mean, I think we're either. Well, it's going to be hard to get bored because the money that's going to be
it's going to be an eye gouger
thrown into this race, and the viciousness with both candidates have proven in the past that they are take no prisoners kind of guys. This will be, you will believe me, you will know that this is a race that's going on if you turn on the television, if you turn on the radio, if you turn on anything.
Did Carl save the city from bankruptcy?
Yeah.
Did Carl DeMaio save the city from bankruptcy?
No, absolutely not. I mean, he was certainly a big part of pushing some of the major reforms that happened in San Diego over the past decade. But he certainly was not. Without him, the city. It's certainly unclear that the city would have gone bankrupt if he wasn't around.
And was Peters so in bed with the employee labor unions that he was willing to shovel money at them and just?
I think his problem, and some may say this was worse, was a problem of ignorance rather than a problem of commission. I mean, he didn't take that. I think he's admitted this at this point. Didn't take the time he needed to understand the gravity of what he was doing with some of those votes.
Was he any more culpable than any of the rest of them?
Well, he was certainly someone who was seen as a leader on the council. I think you saw that later on when he became the first council president.
But for context, he wasn't the president at that time. He was one of 8 council members.
Absolutely, yeah. And the same, at that time the mayor was on the council as well. And so, I think to the extent you blame people who you expect to be better than others, sure, he had the wherewithal. He was a lawyer, right? Had the wherewithal to perhaps understand things better than any others, but certainly his official position was not.
Are you going to see celebrities come to town? I mean, political celebrities, the President of the United States come in Or maybe whoever.
I mean, this is one of the top
in.
5 races in the country, and so I'd expect you to see
president?
surrogates all sorts. I mean, if we saw Obama in the San Diego mayor's race, it's not out of the question that we'd see him here too.
Right.
But it's unclear whether Peters would want him here, right?
In that district.
In that district.
A third. Yeah.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the district for a moment. It's seen as very close, but even in 2 years, in the first, this is a rookie congressman, Peters. He's been there just 2 years. Of course, they have to run every 2 years. Right. Are the demographics changing up there, or is it really as split and as tight as it looks?
I think it's less about the district makeup changing and more about who is going to show up to vote changing. Certainly there are a wave in 2012, which not only got Peters elected, but got Bob Filner elected, got Dave Roberts elected to the county supervisors.
Presidential year, Obama's
exactly,
at the top of the
exactly. That drove a lot of people to the polls that you wouldn't necessarily see at the polls. We saw in the special election for the mayor's race. Again, that was by and large about who showed up to vote. The same Democrats who showed up to vote in 2012 did not show up to vote for David Alvarez in this mayor's election. And so the question is going to be: are we going to have this turnout will be in the middle, right? It's not going to be as high as 2012. It's not going to be as low as the special election for San Diego's mayor. The closer, though, it is to where it is in 2012, the better it is for Peters. The lower, the better it is for DeMaio.
Right. And turnout will be the big issue, because beyond this race, and as we say, there'll be a lot of national money, a lot of national attention, because there's so few congressional districts that are even competitive across the country.
And you have,
there's not much else on the
too.
ballot, though, this time around. Not a lot of sexy propositions. We don't have, legalized marijuana, for example, is not around this time.
Carl is virtually an incumbent. He's no longer in office, but Carl has been around so strongly for a period of years and handles himself almost like an incumbent. So we almost have two, it seems to me, a real incumbent and a quasi-incumbent.
Well, to your point, I mean, he is certainly the problem with a lot of challengers is they're not well known as well known as the incumbents are, but we all know Carl. That's absolutely correct.
Well, I have to wonder too. We've done a lot on this program, a lot of reporting that you folks have done on DeMaio weighing whether he should have jumped into that special mayor's election. Should he have done it? And the Republican establishment and the kingmakers here said no. We're going to go after the guy who's now in the office, Kevin Faulconer here. Right. If he loses this, is it kind of the double whammy of, man, I could have gone to the mayor's office, I could have gone to Congress, now I'm not.
I think once you lose twice, and I think Nathan Fletcher has realized this, losing twice from the mayor's election, it's hard. It's hard. So he'd be, if Carl loses, he'd be in the position of losing twice. And, once you get that kind of loser stink on you, it's very, very hard to return from that.
And I think if Carl had stayed in the mayor's race, I think Todd Gloria might have jumped in. I think David Alvarez would have been a stronger candidate.
Sure, it could have changed the dynamics. The unions could have lined up behind Fletcher instead of forcing someone far further from the left.
All right, well, we'll certainly see how this one plays out as we move on toward November. Well, veterans returning from wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have the GI Bill to help in getting an education, launching a career in civilian life. But state and federal regulators are finding that much of the taxpayer money is going to for-profit colleges that are illegally targeting veterans. This week, state officials cited the San Diego campus of the University of Phoenix, and they were the focus of the Center for Investigative Reporting story of misuse of GI Bill funding. Now, here's a clip from reporter Aaron Glantz's story, which starts with April Gorman, political director of the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America.
Many veterans simply are being aggressively and deceptively recruited by some bad actors in the for-profit school sector.
She says thousands of veterans are being left with worthless degrees and few job prospects.
We're not getting the investment that we wanted when we sent these men and women to school.
In California alone, the Center for Investigative Reporting found nearly 300 schools banned from receiving state financial aid that still got GI Bill money. Even schools with no academic accreditation at all. Beauty schools, auto repair programs, and dog training academies. Together, more than $600 million. The biggest beneficiary is the for-profit University of Phoenix, which fails to graduate most of its students, according to the U.S. Department of Education. Nationally, it took in nearly $1 billion from the GI Bill over the last 5 years.
All right, Tony, the news this week was this San Diego campus of the University of Phoenix state regulators blocked these folks from enrolling GIs right now on the GI Bill. What was the story?
Well, as we've said many times, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are centric to this community because of the Navy and the Marine Corps. Now the aftermath of those wars is also centric here. It's nationwide, but it's also very centric here. University of Phoenix, San Diego campus, part of a national corporation, publicly traded, is a big player in this. $95 million in GI Bill funding in the last several years. And they got shut down, no enrollment in 7 of their programs: management, technology, energy, law enforcement, that kind of thing. They've been shut down for violating a Korean War era rule. 85% of you can't have more than 84.9%, I guess, of your students on GI Bill, because the thought was, back in the Korean War, that would create these mills that would just be grinding out classes of little use, and that's still the accusation. Now, so the state comes in and says no more. Now, it's a complex thing having to do with the Veterans Affairs federal and the Veterans Affairs state. State says no more. The University of Phoenix says we're working with this to change things, and indeed even the state official who helped these investigative reporting folks in their reporting by giving them a report says, yeah, they'll probably be back in compliance. This is nationwide. I mean, the Congress, the Department of Justice, the SEC, they're all onto this idea of these for-profit schools. Are they worth it, or are we just pouring money down the drain?
And how do we know that? I mean, that's one of the things that's so curious in reading in depth these stories, that Congress doesn't seem to have any oversight. They can't, and the lobbyists are so good at blocking any mechanism where we can say, hey, are you graduating folks? Are these legitimate courses we're paying for?
The Phoenix University folks in the last several years have spent $5 million on lobbying. So they speak loudly in Sacramento and in Washington. Yeah, there's no requirement, as I understand it, for the GI Bill money to show graduation requirements or graduation rate, job, how many of them get jobs. Now, there are for state aid, and a lot of these folks, a lot of these for-profits lose the ability to get state aid because they fall below certain percentages. But the big dog at the trough is the GI Bill, enhanced in recent years to help the Afghan and Iraq veterans coming home, mustering out of military service to a very bad economy, and not much out there if you don't really have that skill that fits this economy. And $19,000 a year maximum. That's a lot of bread that you can lay out. Well, federal government can lay out on your behalf. So while there have been all these investigations, actually enrollment has gone down, but it's still huge nationwide. Several 100,000 veterans at any given time. About $1.7 billion a year go to the for-profit institutions.
And just not much control on how it's being spent or how valuable
it is.
Well,
as the spokesman for the veterans group there said on the clip, she used the word investment. Well, the individuals are investing their time, but the money is public money, and so it does come back to that question. First, what do we owe the veterans? Right. What is the nature of our commitment to them? How much money can we afford? And then how should we manage it? Now to
get the bang for the buck,
yeah.
I just find it amazing that they wouldn't, part of that GI Bill wouldn't be to track how many people are getting jobs and graduating. That's just, and there's so many questions about this story. I mean, who's advising these veterans, and shouldn't there be somebody, from the military, from their peers who are advising them on their options? Why aren't they going to community colleges? Are those programs not good? Are they full? And why are they not choosing to go to four-year universities? Is it because it's not worth their time? They can't get jobs?
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't think it's immediate. I mean, you could go to UC San Diego and study Pope versus Dryden, or 18th century Persian architecture, and that'd be lovely. Can you get a job real quick? But these private, University of Phoenix et al., they offer something that, in theory, and they do a lot of marketing, you can walk right out to a good job. And a lot of these military folks, they're not into spending 4 years on campus, bula bula, going to the football games. They're adults.
Yeah.
They want to get on with their lives. Maybe they're married. Maybe they already have children. Let's get a skill. Let's get out there and get productive. And so these are very targeted advertising, according to the allegations. Yeah. That's what the Korean War provision wanted to avoid, targeting these folks that have the GI Bill in their back pocket.
Well, you would also think that if they're not working, then people would, if people aren't getting jobs, then they would stop going to the programs, but they still are clearly, so.
It's decreased somewhat, but yeah, it has gone down. And again, there's investigations going on all over the country, Department of Justice, SEC, Congress is onto it.
Liam?
Yeah, I wonder to what extent, and sort of we're talking around this, like the idea that there's actually identifying a failure in the existing system, right? The existing system, University of Phoenix, there's a market there that has been created, and the existing, universities and community colleges aren't taking advantage of perhaps some of the flexibility that some of these veterans want in, say, online classes or things that these for-profits offer that we're not taking care of them with what we already have.
Well, as I understand it, the for-profits can move more quickly.
Right.
They can gear up to teach a class that such and such a skill. Try starting a new class, a new discipline at the University of California. Well, once you get through the faculty senate, that's 10 years, or even the community colleges. So they move quickly, and it's very, I don't want to use the word seductive, but I will. It's very seductive to veterans getting out, wanting to get a skill, get into that economy, and start being a civilian again.
Well, and community colleges have had their funding cut so drastically in recent years, and that, I wonder how much that plays into it. But I mean, some of the local colleges have really tried to step up programs for veterans and things like biotech and
San Diego State University, right here, one of the best.
Right. Well, I'm sure we'll look for some more in-depth reporting as we go on. A very complex and fascinating story. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guest, Jill Replico of KPBS, Tony Perry of the Los Angeles Times, and Liam Dillon of Voice of San Diego. A reminder, all of the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.